Nice.
Cool. So we're recording now. So yes, if we could start by you just telling a little bit about the product, and in the meantime, I'm going to get some people to join us in.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah. My name's Ant. I'm the CTO at Supabase, and Supabase is the open source Firebase alternative. So for anyone who needs a backend for the web app, mobile app, your startup, that kind of thing, and we give everyone a full Postgres database to use, and it comes complete with auth. It'll have storage. It'll have APIs also generated based on the data that's in your database. So kind of everything you need to get started and build fast.
Cool. And you went, yeah, go on.
No, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was going to say, you went through Techstars before with a different startup, right? So maybe if you could tell a little bit about the story of your entrepreneur career and what you did before and all this stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so I started, my first company that I started was in London, and it was a fashion tech company actually. And the idea was it was going to be a black book for people in the fashion industry. So if you were a creative designer, a photographer, a model, makeup artist, this kind of thing, you could get hired through the platform. You can have your whole portfolio on there. And so we got into Techstars with that project, and yeah, I mean the Techstars experience was incredible, very formative, lots of entrepreneurial based education. They do like a mini MBA, and so you get your finance for startups and marketing for startups, and even some cool stuff like how to reach people in how to reach unreachable people, I think was one of the topics. So how to reach these CEOs who are at the top, and how you can get in touch with them and network with them and stuff like this. So really a nice thing to be a part of as well.
Mm-hmm. And I have heard that the interview process and everything is very different to between Techstars and YC. Maybe you could tell a little bit about that. So what was it like applying? What is the process like, and what happened?
Yeah, so obviously the application process is similar. They'll give you a form to fill out with a bunch of existing questions. And then with Techstars, the interview process, which I've been through twice now with two different companies. The first time I got accepted, the second time I failed, was a lot of rounds of interview. Actually, I think the first time we did 9 interviews in total, all with different people. Most of them were remote, and then I think the last interview was in person in London. This was for London Techstars. And then when you compare that with YC, it's quite different, because the YC process is obviously they'll read your application. You might get invited to like a pre-screen interview, which will just take a couple of minutes, and then you obviously just have the main event interview, which is 10 minutes, which is still unbelievable to me that it's so they can make a decision in such a short amount of time. But super short in comparison to the Techstars one.
And so once you're in Techstars, what's the experience like? Is it also very different to Y Combinator, or is it mostly the same? And if you could tell a little bit about this kind of how is Techstars on the inside?
Yeah, quite different. Actually, when I did it, obviously it was pre-COVID times, and we had to work from the same shared office. So everyone has to come in, all the companies have to come in every day to the same office space, which really forces you to create a bond between yourself and the other companies. And that's the great thing. It's probably the most important thing about these accelerators, is the networking you do with the other companies. And and long after the programs, you still have these people you can call upon, even more than the partners at Techstars and YC. You stay in contact with the other founders, and you ask them, did you have to go through this process? What did you do? How did you hire for this role? So I think being in the same office really forced us to forge that bond. And then Techstars, there's a lot of, like I mentioned, a lot of programming, like set programming, that they expect you to attend. So they expect you to attend all the mini MBA stuff, and which is actually incredibly useful. YC, on the other hand, is a bit more, they leave you to your own devices, and it's up to you whether you sink or swim. And then you obviously have your group office hours with the partners, and they'll just say to you, you know, what have you been doing for the last week? And it's up to you to have been, you know, self-motivating and to bring the numbers, and so you get a little bit more freedom, but the expectations are quite high on what you deliver week to week.
And so if you had to choose one, which one is better, YC or Techstars?
I think it totally depends on the business, if I'm being honest. I think for us, for Supabase, it's aimed at developers. So being in the YC patch, it's quite a good opportunity to sell to the other companies, or to at least, you know, try your product and get feedback with other highly technical companies. I think if you were doing something else in a specific vertical, whether it be robotics, e-commerce, it would be quite good to look at the, you know, they have Techstars accelerators which are specific to these verticals in various cities. So I think there was one in Singapore recently where we are, which was partnered with Rakuten, and then you had access to the, you know, the Rakuten executives and their network and their technology stack. So if you were trying to sell, you know, a mobile platform in Asia, then that would probably be preferable than going to YC. So I think it just totally depends on the business.
Makes sense. We have a few questions from the audience. So Vadim is asking, what were the questions during the 10-minute interview?
Again, quite different depending on the company, because they, you know, all the partners will have read your application beforehand, and you'll generally get partnered with people who understand your vertical quite well already, or your industry. So for us, they were asking, you know, you might get some questions about the competition, and this is something that I give feedback on a lot. Is I think it's good to know a lot about your competition and show that you know a lot about your competition. So just purely as proof that you really understand the space well. Like a lot of people are shy to talk about the hottest competitors because they're worried that, you know, oh, it might look like we can't compete, or this company has already taken most of the market. But I think it's good if you can bring that information, and you have some really good detail on your competitors. It shows you really know the space. And one of the funny things with what we do is, a lot of times investors, when you speak to them, will ask you, well, what's stopping from Google, you know, creating this product and competing with you? And the funny thing about Supabase is Firebase exists, and it's existed for a while. So in a way, Google has already built the competitor for us. But obviously YC funded us regardless of that. So I think that's sort of proof that, you know, you don't need to be too afraid of your competitors, and you don't need to be too afraid of telling the YC partners who they are and what they do. I mean, in most cases, they'll probably know already, right?
And so you have specific partners that interview you, and then are they also the ones that have the office hours with you? And how would you say is that advice? Is it very specific to the vertical, or is it just general startup advice? And what happens in those partner meetings?
Yeah. I think for us, we had the same partners who interviewed us, were our partners throughout the batch. We worked closely with Jared, who knows a lot about the developer tools space. So for us, those conversations were very tailored towards the developer tools market. Because the batch is now obviously remote, we got put in group office hours with other companies in the region. So we're currently based in Singapore, so we got put with other Singaporean companies in India, and it wasn't really specific to any vertical. Obviously, there was a bit of discussion about accessing the regional, the domestic markets here, but apart from that, it was quite generic, startup advice.
We have a few more questions from the audience, but just before we go into them, so what's the secret of getting into, Techstars? Then Y Combinator? I think you also went through entrepreneur first. So, like, what would be the advice you would give to people to get into these things?
Yeah, I think the main bit of advice is to be bold about your achievements. I'm British, and you're not brought up in England to speak very loudly about your own accomplishments. You're supposed to be quite modest and all of this. So I really had to learn to speak up about the things that I've done in the past and the things that our team have accomplished in the past. And it's advice we got when we were applying to YC was to be more American in a sense, just to be more bold about what you've done in the past. So I think that's good advice. And also just to talk a lot about what you've done so far, and not so much about maybe where you plan to go, because I think people, even if you've been working on a project for a few weeks, and if you can show that, look, this is how much we've learned about this space or about this business or about this customer in 8 weeks, then it says a lot more than saying, oh, here's where we're going to go in, at the end of this year or the end of next year. And you can really show through the experience, like how much of an understanding about the industry or the business you're capable of learning in a short space of time. And then the other thing is YC in particular like to see traction, even if it's small. So even if your addressable market is millions of users, if you can say, listen, we've got 25 users on board, and here's what we've learned from these people, and here's how we're going to apply that learning to the next 10, the next 15. So don't be shy about small numbers, basically, because there's always something to be learned from every individual user that uses your tool or your business.
Mm-hmm. And so if you had to give some basic ideas, I mean, obviously it's going to depend a lot on the exact startup, but how could you go for generating that traction early on very quickly, just for the sake of showing to investors, YC, etc.? Any ideas you have on that?
Yeah, I think we learned a lot from looking at how other YC companies did it in the past. The famous example is Stripe, of how they would identify a potential customer, then they would show up at the person's office and they would help them implement Stripe, right? They would write the code for them to integrate the platform, and we did that early on. So our first customer, we literally got the bus down to their office and sat with them and said, listen, this is the tool. Here's how it works. We installed it for them. We wrote some code for them, and they're still integrated today, and they're still making API requests every day on the platform. And so, the famous Paul Graham advice is do things that don't scale. And I think that's honestly the best way to get the first set of customers. You don't have to have a fancy onboarding process, or it doesn't even have to be automated in any way. It can be, writing an email or picking up the phone or getting the bus and trying to convince someone in person to adopt your tool.
Mm-hmm. And let's say on people adopting a tool, would you say, and obviously this question is also in terms of like your product strategy and also the strategy you're going to have with investors and YC, etc. But would you say it's better to have paid users initially or to have a bunch of free users using the platform for free?
It's a good question. I think nowadays YC are very keen that people prove that people will pay for the service. So I think especially with consumer-based things, revenue is important. But our platform, we just announced pricing yesterday after a year of not charging anyone anything to use the service. So it's not essential that you are generating revenue, but I think for more consumer-based things, it's slightly more important.
And if you had to kind of say one skill that people can improve on to improve their odds of getting into accelerators and generally having success with startup fundraising, could you pinpoint something, or is it kind of too general?
No, I think being process driven is very important, because with fundraising in general, it's ultimately a numbers game. You're gonna speak to a lot of people. You're gonna get rejected a lot of times, but if you speak to enough people, eventually someone will say yes. So you can, you know, over the course of 200 meetings, you'll be able to refine your pitch. You know, you'll be able to improve your business based on the feedback that you're continually getting throughout these meetings. So just have a process. You know, have a list of potential people you want to speak to, and the same with YC interviews. Have a process around refining your pitch. So I think before we interviewed for YC last year, we did maybe 30 mock interviews with friends, people in other startups, founders who've been through YC before, to really make sure that we knew our numbers and we knew how to cast the business in the right light, and just stick to that process and, you know, do lots and lots of 10-minute interviews until you get really good at presenting the best version of yourself and of your business.
Mm-hmm. And so obviously when you go through any accelerator, it gives you a sort of stamp on your startup. YC gives you the biggest stamp, and maybe there is some other accelerators that give you a very reputable stamp, and then the down you go, the less the stamp has meaning. But would you say that it really helps a lot when raising money after having gone through an accelerator, or is it just like okay, good how maybe you get access to investors, but you still have to prove it and you still have to kind of seal the case, or is it really that like you have it and wow, it's really easy to get funding?
Obviously the name does help. The thing that accelerators rarely do is they create a time pressure on the investors. So if you're not in an accelerator and you're going out and you're taking meetings, a lot of investors will feel that they have the power, in a sense, that they can just wait. You know, I'll wait a couple of weeks, see how these guys get on. I'll wait a couple of months, maybe, and you can try and create some artificial time pressure with these investors. But what YC and Techstars and all these guys do is they have that mechanism down to a fine art with demo day. And so all of the investors know that the companies present at the same time, and will be exposed to a lot of other investors at the exact same moment. And so they feel that there's a competition perhaps between themselves and the other investors to get the hottest deals. So that's what it's really about. That's what really works about accelerators is the time pressure that it creates. And obviously the brand helps with that as well.
Mm-hmm. And what would you say is bigger value, the actual information and knowledge you get from the accelerator or the fundraising opportunities?
I think the knowledge, but also the network. So I think having the opportunity to meet the other companies and founders who are going through the same process at the same time as you are is what's really special. And I think that's what's great about the group that you've put together actually here, is everyone's going through this process at the same time, right? So you can help each other, share information, and it really is like a powerful thing to have access to, is other people, you know, sharing the same emotions, going through the same process. And I think with um, accelerators, to see other companies that are generating millions in monthly recurring revenue, really you start to feel that, oh, it's not it's not that unachievable, right? Because if you're on your own and you're working away in your startup in some random city on your own, you might think, wow, it's quite a big task. But when you see other people around you making it work, really gives you that boost to think, well, maybe we can achieve this, and let's aim a little bit higher.
Right. It sounds like you kind of get inspired by the accomplishments of others, and then you understand what's possible. It gives you inspiration as to maybe how to approach things, and it just helps everyone, because then someone gets inspired from you, and then they do things, and you kind of get inspired from them back. So
Totally.
this kind of stuff. Yeah, and but
Yeah.
just returning for a second to creating that artificial kind of hype and deadline. Any tips on any advice on how to go for doing it? If you are not a part of Accelerator, but you're just raising a small pre-seed or a seed, any ways that someone could kind of replicate and yeah, just do those tactics.
Yeah, it's funny because, like with anything, you're more desirable when you're not desperate. I think is the lesson that, you know, it's not just for startups. It applies in a lot of other areas of life as well. Is to not appear desperate when you're fundraising, um, to communicate that you have enough runway to last, but there's other people, um, that you're meeting other people. And I think, like, so a lot of the advice that YC gives is to batch investors together, and take all of your meetings in the same week. Because obviously, if you spread them out, there's less of this competition and time pressure. But if you meet them all together, then investors talk as well, right? So they'll share information on startups. Oh, who are you looking at? Oh, these guys look hot. And if they find out that, you know, you've spoken to them and 10 of their friends in the same week, then there's going to be a little bit more pressure on them to make a decision.
Makes sense. We have a few questions from the audience. So Naila is asking, do you think YC creates more independence for founders, a strong ability to figure things out rather than Techstars?
It's difficult. I think both do a very good job of this kind of entrepreneurial education, if you will. So both are definitely up there, and a lot of accelerators as well do a very good job of this. But again, the other people in the batch are the people that you rarely learn from, and you see people running processes for different things like hiring, and you think, whoa, that's a really neat way of doing that, or fundraising, or that you know, these people have got a good thing going on, and you pick up tips that way.
When you say that you learn from other people in the batch, so what exactly do you learn? Kind of their experiences of what worked, for instance, how to get more users or how to solve specific issues, or is it more also the product insights? Like, could you pinpoint something specific that you learn from others in the batch, and perhaps how could you replicate that if you're not a part of Accelerator? How could you learn from other people?
Yeah, I think one of the things, again, a lot of it's quite fascinating. A lot of it comes down to having good processes in your business. So we developed, based on watching other people in the batch and in previous YC batches, a strategy around how frequently we ship, for example. So we try to ship big features once every 3 months, and smaller things, incremental things, once a month. And we sort of built up this rhythm, but we tailored this process from looking at other startups doing this as well. And then another example might be, yeah, I think again around fundraising, like when you see that people have a real solid process in place, and they say, oh, I spoke to 63 investors last week, I spoke to 72 the week before, I'm going to speak to 13 next week, and here's the percentage who have said maybe, here's the percentage who have said yes. To see people coming out with these statistics about just a regular a work process is pretty insightful.
And is all of this learning, does it happen kind of naturally, or are there structured ways that, let's say, YC encourages you to share your insights and for other people to share them with you, or does it just happen naturally as you just go through the accelerator?
Yeah, there's three main ways. The first is we had a shared Slack with all of the other companies. And so obviously when you do a product launch or something like this, you'll share it in the Slack, and a lot of people get to, or even if it's a blog post, oh, here's a post about how we manage our hiring process. And you obviously get exposed to those things. Another one is group office hours. And everyone, when you join the group office hours, you're expected to say what went badly last week, what went well, and where are you going to be next week. And just those 3 points, you can learn a lot from listening to the other founders talk. And then the third way is one-on-ones. So everyone's encouraged to set up sort of one-on-one calls with another random founder from the batch, and just have a 5-10 minute coffee chat. And those conversations are always super interesting because people tell you about their problems that they have right now, and how they're thinking about solving it and this. So yeah, those three ways.
But it actually sounds like all of these things, you could kind of replicate them if you wanted to, just by reaching out to founders, asking for chats, being in all kinds of communities. Do you think it's possible to get to any kind of serious level where you're actually able to pick up insights, or would it still be kind of just a bit random just because the quality is quite low on a random founder pool?
No, I think you absolutely can. It's just obviously finding these communities. Like I said earlier, the community that you're building here, I think, has that quality, or has that potential at least, where people can really learn a lot from just having maybe one-on-one chats, or group conversations with each other. Another good one is obviously YC's Startup School, which is the larger program that they run. I think they run it all year round now, and that kind of has a similar structure and a similar flow to the actual batch. The main difference is you don't have one-on-ones with the partners, and you don't obviously receive investment. But apart from that, all of the other mechanisms that I mentioned are still present, and that's the good stuff, actually.
Mm-hmm. So we have just a few minutes left, and I just wanted to ask if you have any tips on kind of building a better product. So the way I see it is that fundraising and all this is basically an effect of having a good product and having something people want. And this is something I definitely picked up also from watching all the free YC material. And is there like any tips or the best things you have found that really help you to make a good product and to understand better your users, or anything you could say in that regard?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is to have some measure of how well it's going, basically. So with Supabase, for example, we use daily active apps as our measure. So anyone who makes more than 10 API requests per day, we class as an active app. And we look at this graph every day, and we say how has it increased or decreased from yesterday? How are we doing this week? How are we doing this month? And that's the main indicator of whether we're doing the right things and moving in the right direction. And is usually, if you do, you try and do a product launch on Product Hunt or Hack and Use or something, you'll hopefully get a spike, and then are those users retained for any meaningful amount of time, is a really good indicator to whether you're on the right track. So I think measurement is important, and then obviously just being quite close to your power users and just constantly asking them, what's the feedback? What's the bad? What's the negative feedback? What's positive? What would you like to see next? And I think being explicitly asking for negative feedback has helped us a lot, actually, because you really find out what's not right about the product when people might be otherwise too shy to tell you.
And are there any specific ways you frame it? Since obviously, if you kind of ask nicely, then people just don't want to kind of upset you, so they will give you nice feedback. So how do you go for framing it to actually get that raw, proper input and like get those real details and of what people really hate in the product?
Yeah, there's a great guide. People might be aware of it already. The Mom Test is a book exactly on this topic, about how to go about user interviews, and whether people will feel comfortable sharing the negative insights. But another way that we found is we have a small feedback widget in the corner of our application, and we encourage people to just dump any feedback into that window. And I think because they're not interfacing with another human, people are a little bit more honest, right? If you're just typing into a text box, they'll tell you all sorts of things that they might not tell you on a video call, which is quite nice.
Makes sense. So basically, you just want to, number one, how a very like measured iterative loop, not just into the loop. You want to collect actual stats and be able to benchmark them against the past. And number two, just ask people and try to ask them through mediums where they can actually be honest.
Yeah, and there's actually one more which turned out to be quite important for us, which is the product messaging and the sort of go-to-market strategy. We're very technical people, and we focus a lot on the product and the quality of the product. And I think previously we had an underappreciation for experimenting with the message that we were putting out. So early on, we called ourselves a real-time Postgres, which obviously worked for some technical people who understood what Postgres is, or they really want real time. We changed that message to the open source Firebase alternative. And with the same product, it was like day and night. We accessed a whole new cohort of potential users who all of a sudden understood better what we did. And the product launches worked better on Hack and Use, all of this stuff. And we didn't actually change any product. We just changed the tagline. So I think experimenting with that and which segments you're trying to sell to is just as important as experimenting with the product and updating the product.
But it sounds like that's a little bit more intuitive in getting the inputs of how it's working versus actually having the data. Or would you say there's still ways you can measure it just by those metrics that you would track?
Yeah, I mean, the metrics help a lot more after the initial acquisition. Mm-hmm. So once you've acquired a user, how long do they stay on the page for before they leave? How frequently do they log in? Those metrics help a lot. But I think with the initial acquisition, it's more about experimenting obviously on the marketing side and with that product message.
Mm-hmm. So we have just one question from Nelly. She's curious as to why many YC companies choose to keep it a secret until demo day. Is there any kind of specific reasons for that?
Yeah, that's also to do with the investor time pressure, actually. So the advice you get is to either wait until demo day before you announce, or wait until around 2 weeks before demo day. so that investors only find out that you're in the batch just as you're about to make your public launch, which puts a bit more pressure on the investment decisions.
Makes sense. And I think that's something that people have always been curious about, especially in the Slack community now. Everyone's asking that. So thanks for that insight. Thank you so much for this. Anything else you'd like to share, or how can people kind of use your product, and where should I go? And is there anything you would like to share on the product?
Yeah, sure. I mean, this week is we're having a launch week where we launch one new feature every day. Yesterday we announced our pricing, which took us a long time to really get right, and we hope we've got it right. And if anyone has feedback and knows about databases and Firebase and this kind of stuff, we'd love that feedback. I think tonight we'll launch storage, so file storage. And then we've got a few more things lined up. So if people just look for Supabase on Twitter or supabase.io, you can try us out and definitely give us as much negative feedback as you can think of, because it helps.
Cool. Thank you so much for this.
Thanks, man. Thanks for organizing, and thanks for everyone who posted questions.
Yeah, and so this is going to be also available on YouTube, and I'm going to share the link with everyone to kind of rewatch it, or if you didn't have a chance to join live. Thanks.
Great.
Bye.
Thanks, man. See ya.